So my name is Bob Ainsworth, and when I worked, I was an accountant. And I had my CPA, and I was like a controller and that sort of thing. And I also taught accounting at night because we had kids and a mortgage and had to pay those. And when I was getting close to retirement, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I have a plate in my back, so I can only play golf once a week. Otherwise, I'll just wear it out, so that's no good. And I thought I would teach, but they wanted me to teach in the summers, and that was no fun. And I thought I could maybe do consulting, but I'm not really good at marketing, and I didn't have a lot of contacts, so I wasn't going to get any business. So those were all sort of out the door. And I thought I could, the other thing I thought of when I taught accounting, I used to tell stories about fraud and embezzlement, because I discovered a couple while I worked, one for one of my bosses who was stealing, and he fired me. And other ones just that I knew about, but I didn't have enough content, right? I wasn't like an FBI agent or a white-collar crime detective or something. So I didn't have enough stuff to talk about. So I sort of washed that away. But I always like to read, and I still do, and I like to read two things, history and mysteries. So like the last history I read was on James Buchanan, the president before Lincoln, and he really precipitated the Civil War by a whole bunch of stupid things. Like when I was a kid, I read the Perry Masons, remember, by Earl Stanley Gardner, and they were on TV, and I'd like read the books, and then I'd watch it, and I just thought that was great. So I got to thinking, well, maybe I could write a story, a fictional mystery, except I've never written anything since college, right? And that was about 4,000 years ago. So I had no idea if I could write or not. And I came up with a couple of things that helped me out. One was I decided that my main character would be somebody I worked with who was an absolute genius, started a $1 billion company. We put out the Dummies books, and I was the accountant for that for a while. Just genius guy. So I made him my main character. He's my Harry Bartlett. And then other people that I liked around him were people I admired. And everybody who I thought were jerks became my bad guys. So it made it sort of easy because I had faces and names and I had reasons I liked or disliked. And then I decided that I would write about places I knew. So my first book, Conned, is on Nantucket, and that's set at a friend's house. Giant 10,000 square foot house, but that's there. Yeah, it's gigantic. And Duped, which is what I did the research for the Gardner theft on, was on the Gardner. So that's pretty easy, I can find that. And I just kept going that way. So I wrote the first book while I was riding a train into Boston. And I just started handwriting, and I filled it up in about 6 weeks, and I typed it up, and I had 150 double-spaced pages, which is a lot of content. That's like 40% of a book, because a book is about 350 pages. And so my friend read it, and he said, I really like this. He said, but I love your character called Uncle Louie. And Uncle Louie is sort of this Sopranos-type hitman type guy. And he said, write a book about Uncle Louie. So I looked for the biggest crime in Boston that I could have this guy work on, and of course, it's this. So I did a whole lot of research and everything and put it in the book. And he read the book and he liked it, and he said, you ought to start doing presentations on this thing, and I've booked you in Gardner, Mass, not the Isabella, but the Gardner, Mass, up by Fitchburg. And he said, I've booked you in like 6 weeks, so you better put a presentation together so you can go talk to them. And I did, I started doing that, and this is like my 40th or so presentation like this. So, it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. Everything up here is true, as best I can tell, right? My books are all made up, but mostly. But, so this is as best I can tell you what is out there for knowledge. Okay? So what I would like you to do is I'd like you all to relax, and I'd like you all to close your eyes. So I want you to think about yourself hovering over the city of Boston. Down below you is a rectangle building with a skylight in the middle. In front of the building is the Fens. Off to the left is Fenway Park and the Citgo sign at Kenmore Square. Over to the right is the Museum of Fine Arts and Northeastern University. If you go past the Fens, you get to Sturrow Drive, Charles River, and Cambridge. It's March 18th, 1990. It's about an hour after the end of St. Patrick's Day. On the side of that building that you're looking down on is a road to the left called Palace Road. It's a one-way street going towards the Fens. On the side of the building is a little bump out. It's the employee entrance. And about 100 feet down away from the fens on that Palace Road is a car. Now the street's not very well lit, sort of an amber color. Two men are sitting in the car. One's a little taller than the other. All of a sudden they hear noise behind them. It's a group of kids. They're singing Irish songs, St. Patrick's Day song. There's 5 of them. They come wandering up the street. They're fooling around. They tumble to the ground opposite the car. One of the girls looks up. She sees the left shoulder patch of the driver. The patch says Boston Police. Oh my God, we got to get out of here. We're going to get busted. They were underage. So they get up, scramble away over towards Simmons College and disappear. And the guys in the car do nothing. A couple of minutes later, that side entrance, the door opens up all of a sudden and then closes. Light flashes out, light disappears. The guys in the car do nothing again. They sit there till about 20 after 1. Then the driver puts the car in gear and slowly glides up to where he's opposite that side entrance, the side bump out. And they get out of the car. The 2 men are in complete Boston police officer uniforms. They have the pointed hats. They have the gold down the strip pants. They go up to the side entrance. Hey, let us in. We hear there's been a disturbance here. They get buzzed in. Now they're in a glass enclosed area. They flash their badges. They get buzzed in again. Off to their right is a counter. Behind the counter is a security guard. He's a hippie looking guy. Long ponytail. Hey, can you come out here? We got a question for you. He comes out from behind the counter. Where's your partner? So there's always 2 guards. Oh, he's doing his rounds. Call him. So they give him his walkie-talkie. He calls his partner. His partner comes down. Hey, you know, we think there's a warrant out for your arrest. They slam them up against the wall. They pull their wallets out. They look at their driver's licenses. We know your names. We know your addresses. You better not talk about this or we're going to come after you. They duct tape them, handcuff them, and say, gentlemen, this is a robbery. They lead the 2 men down to the basement. They don't miss a step. They don't take a wrong turn. They know exactly where they're going. They take one of the guards to one end, handcuff him up to some pipes, take the other guard to the other end, do the same thing. This has taken 20 minutes. They're not in a rush because they know they will never be discovered. They go back upstairs. They skip the first floor, go to the second floor. They go to the Dutch room. They start taking paintings off the wall. They're busting frames. They're razor blading things. One of them goes around the center courtyard to the short room or short gallery. He starts taking stuff down. He goes back to help his buddy, then he goes back to the short room again, then they finish up. They've been at this for almost an hour now. They take all 13 items that they're going to steal down to the guard's counter area. They bring with them a busted frame and they put that on the security director's chair as a gotcha. They take the videotape that had been taping the street activity and the activity by the guard's desk. They take a paper tape that showed all of the movement in the Gardner while they were there. They take their stuff out to the car, takes them 2 times, in and out, in and out. They get in the car, drive up that side road, and they're gone. So now you can open your eyes. So that's the theft. And I wanted you to have an image of it because I'm going to show you a lot about the theft, about Isabella, about the stuff that was taken. I'll tell you where the stuff might be. I'll tell you the guys who did it. I'll tell you some of maybe other people who planned it and maybe where the stuff is. And I'll tell you very interesting people who have showed up at this presentation because it's sort of like moths to a flame. And I get very like I had the FBI agent who was the first guy on the scene that morning because he had the beeper. It's a guy named Ed Quinn. And he showed up that morning and he wouldn't tell me very much, but he was in the audience. So it's sort of people like that that show up. So this is what the Dutch room looked like on the second floor after they were done. Right? These were not art lovers. These were thieves. So you can see everything that they're doing. So that's the tapestry room back there. They went in there for a second or two and then took off. This is the courtyard over here. But you can see all the damage that they did, right? They were just there to bust stuff and get out of there. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Isabella, a very interesting woman. There's a really good book, something called The Lioness of Boston, but she was very careful of her image. So there aren't a lot of photos of her. There are more sketches and newspaper sketches and paintings. But that's her as a girl. This is her engagement picture to Jack Gardner. So she came from New York, very wealthy dad. She married him. He was very wealthy, came from the North Shore shipbuilding or something. So between the two of them, they had a lot of money. They did have a child named Jackie. Unfortunately, he passed pretty soon after he was born. She had one other pregnancy that ended in a miscarriage, and that's when they started traveling. So they went to China and Europe and collected things. This is her in '88. That's her on a ladder directing the people what to do. So it wasn't like she wrote a check and said, build me a museum. She was clearly directing every piece of this activity. This is her in her spiritualist phase. She was a little quirky, so she went that way. And this is a picture of her later in her life. So this is the famous painting that's there by John Singer Sargent. And if you've been there, you know, this does no justice to it at all. If you see it, the red just pops, the gold just pops. It's gorgeous. And then there's these two that were done by a guy named Anders Zorn. And you see that headdress? Those are diamonds on the tips of that. So when I say she had a lot of money, she had a lot of money. So this is a picture of her. She borrowed Rex the lion from the Franklin Park Zoo and walked him up Boylston Street. And we know that because, right, there it says Boston Globe. There's the article. She walked the lion up because she could, and she was flamboyant that way. And so remember, this was 1880s, 1890s. Women, you know, didn't get the right to vote till what, 1917, 17th Amendment. So, you know, she was sort of out there for the time. But, you know, she was drinking beer, smoking cigarettes, oh my God, driving her car fast. But as a friend of hers said, you know, she's the millionaire bohemian, the eccentric, the leader of the smart set. She had a lot of artists and writers around her. So when her dad died, he left her about $78 million, or the equivalent. And when Jack died, he left her another $100 million. So she had the equivalent of $180 million to spend. And that's what she spent it on. They started collecting early. And even though Jack passed, she kept building a museum. I mean, this was her vision. This is what she wanted to do. And the museum opened it up in 2003. It has 4 floors. She lived on the 4th floor. That side bump out I asked you to imagine, that was her private entrance when she lived there. And then she passed away and gave the museum $1.2 million, which was okay. That's sort of a lot of money. So this side over here is what her dad built for them after they got married. And then they were collecting more, so Jack built the other side. So this is on Beacon Street, sort of down near the public garden. Unfortunately, when she moved into museum, she sold those. And they were bought by a member of the Draper family who tore it all down. So this is the building now, but there is a little plaque there that says this is where Isabella lived. So just to give you a frame of reference, in case you couldn't from the visual, so there's the museum, there's Fenway, there's the MFA. That road that's on the side there is a road called Palace Road. So I'm only going to ask you to remember 3 things. You have to remember Palace Road and 2 more that I'll show you. So just another sort of visual for Boston. So there's the Fenway. I think you're all going to know where and what I'm talking about when I do this next one, right? Whitey Bulger territory. And he sort of maybe has something to do with this. The second thing I want you to remember is that. TRC Auto Electric. It's in Dorchester, on Dorchester Avenue. It's a car repair place. So Palace Road, TRC. And the third one I want you to remember is the city of Revere, which is about 6 miles north of Boston. So that's all the homework you're going to have to do. So the Gardner, in case you haven't been there, is a 4-story thing, goes around a courtyard. The courtyard is gorgeous. As a friend of hers said, if she inherited money, she'd fill it with beautiful objects. And that's exactly what she did. That was her vision. So this is a place she and Jack used to stay at when they were in Venice, sort of an inspiration for the Gardner itself. And this is another place she liked. And she liked it so much that you see those balconies? They're in the Gardner. She shipped balconies. So when you go in the Gardner, in case you don't know, the floors are from monasteries, the ceilings are from castles, the fireplaces are from this place. Almost everything there is things that she shipped. And that's, of course, the courtyard. And you can see back there, the paintings are there. See, on the sides. But, it's a gorgeous place to go to, especially in winter, right? When everything's bleak around here and you go this and you see it's just a great place to see. So this is what the Fenway looked like when she bought the museum. The Fenway wasn't a great place. It was sort of ugly looking. It was sort of on the outskirts. But then, she bought it and turned it into that. And it just became, and then people started going out more on the city of Boston. So one big question is, why were people able to break into this thing? It's got billions of dollars of art. You would think it would be impenetrable, except it wasn't. And part of the reason, unfortunately, had to do with her. So this is her will. And like I said, she gave $1.2 million to the museum, but they could only use the income. So if you do some quick math on $1.2 million, say 10% is $120,000. You can't run a museum on $120,000. You just can't. And there was something else. If you go to the Gardner right now, the fourth floor has administrative offices and several thousand pieces of art that you will never see, stuff she collected. And the reason you'll never see it is this, because she said, and you don't have to read it all, I'll highlight it, she said, if you move anything from where I put it or dispose of it, then you have to sell everything in the museum, you have to sell the building, and all the money goes to Harvard. So that's why the frames are back up, even though there's nothing in them, because that's the best they can do to satisfy her will. So it's not like they could even lend stuff out or sell the excess or do anything. They were handcuffed. On top of that, the people who were on the board were not great fundraisers. If you're on a board, you have 3 jobs. Write a check, get friends to write big checks, and go to board meetings. And if you do the first 2, they don't care if you show up to meetings. Their board of directors did not raise money. So the place had like plastic over paintings. It had rubber mats on the floor. It didn't have proper air conditioning and humidity control. And they couldn't spend money on security or guards. The guards were hippies and old men, literally. That camera that I told you about that was taping the street, and they had no backup for that. Normally with guards, if they go around and they punch in, I've been here, I've been here, I've been here, and if they don't do their rounds, alarms go off, the police come, they had no system like that. So as soon as that guard was out from behind the counter, because that's where the buzzers were, the place, they could have stayed there till 7 o'clock when the next shift showed up. And they knew that. That's why they got him out from behind the counter. So there were 13 items taken. Not all of them were paintings. So this is, and so I've looked up values of this, and you can probably find different values, but that's a Vermeer. There's only about 33 in the world, and that's worth $250 million. This is a Rembrandt. It says only Seascape. That's worth $100 million. This is what I stole for my cover because, nobody's going to arrest me for stealing that image, so I did. And I found that's only worth about $10 million, but who knows? And that's another Rembrandt. Then there's this by Manet, and for some reason I couldn't find a value for it, but I'm sure it's worth a lot. That's a thing called Landscape with Obelisk by a guy named Flink. He was a student of Rembrandt, and a long time they thought it was a Rembrandt painting. This is a 2x2 little sketch by Rembrandt that, I'm not kidding, I found was worth $250 million. That little thing, it's a 2x2. So this is the room now, Dutch room. So that's where Lady and Gentleman in Black was. That's where Sea of Galilee was. So this one's going to be a little hard to see. Let's see if I can do this. So you see that little white dot on the table? There was a vase there. It's called a goo or a coup. So they're taking Vermeers and they're taking a vase. Very odd selection. The Vermeer was right there. The Flink was behind it. They're sort of back to back. This was not taken. That's a Rembrandt. That little 2x2 was right there on the side there. They didn't take that. And this is the corridor they took to go around to the short gallery. And that's the back so you can see where the Flink was. So this is the short gallery. It's not much bigger than a walk-in closet. So this is a flag of Napoleon's. It was on a staff, and on top of the staff was an eagle called a finial. They took that eagle. They also took 6 sketches from the 6th door back in here. So it's not like they even went to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd. They went to the 6th to get those, not the other ones. Very odd choice. right? So that's where all that stuff was. So this is the finial. You can see it says 1 for Napoleon, and here's that. So this is the only item of the 13 that's ever been seen. And it was seen because 2 years ago, a guy who was a jeweler on Washington Street came forward. And he said a couple of months after the theft, somebody walked into him with an item wrapped in a cloth and presented the eagle and said, would you buy this? Would you appraise it? How much is it worth? And the guy came and he said, Jesus, why didn't you just steal the Mona Lisa? It would be easier to sell than the eagle you just stole from 2 miles away. The guy who brought that eagle was a guy named Bobby Donati, and Bobby Donati comes from Revere. So that's that connection there. That's the only item that's been seen, but I did this presentation, doesn't matter where, and a woman came to me and said her husband had photos of the stolen items out of the frames. After they were stolen, he had photos. And then somebody stole the photos from her. And she said she thinks she knows where the Gardner stuff is, that it's in her husband's old building. But she wouldn't give me where it was. She gave me her name and whatever, but there's somebody else who thinks they know where the 13 items are. And it's actually not that far from here. So the other stuff that was taken, there were these 5 Degas sketches. 3 of them are of jockeys. And you know, they're nice, but they're not Vermeers, they're not Rembrandts, but they were taken. So this is what she paid for everything. I'll leave this one up there for a minute, but it's sort of interesting in terms of what she paid for things. So that thing that's the little Rembrandt, she paid $120 for. The vase, she paid $17,000 for. The Vermeer, she only paid $5,600 for. So, you know, things were valued differently, but in total, she spent $142,000, and the stuff is worth, pick a number. Pick a number, add a bunch of zeros, and keep going, because the stuff is priceless. So like I said, I was an accountant. I sort of like to see some details and documents. So that's her receipt for the Chez Tortoni. That's her receipt for shipping the Degas. Right there it says Degas. That's her inventory for a Rubens and a Rembrandt. This is her paying $120 for a trois moustache. So they call it that because it looks like he has 3 mustaches. So they call it, au trois moustache. And that's a receipt, for the concert. Right there it says concert. And there's a receipt for that Napoleon flag. I couldn't find a receipt for the eagle itself. And this is her receipt for a Rembrandt. And this is her personal check for half of that vase. So I just thought it was kind of cool being an accountant that I could find her check drawn on State Street Bank. So why were those 13 items taken? So this is the 1984 guidebook to the Gardner. And I got to this point in the presentation, and 3 presentations ago, this woman reaches in her purse and pulls out that book. And I'm like, oh my God, I've never actually seen it. And it was in perfect shape. You know, she's like, do you want to make copies of the pages? And I'm like, well, no, I have what I need. And if I copy it, I'm going to bust the spine, and I don't want to do that. But she's just like, oh yeah, here's the book you're talking about. It's like, wow, I better be right on this stuff because people seem to be fact-checking me a lot. Anyway, that's the 84 guidebook. It's a reprint of the 76 guidebook, which had a green cover. So this is the description of the Dutch room. Look at the items that are pictured. There's that vase, and there's Storm in the Sea of Galilee. Here's the page that describes the obelisk. The items that were pictured in the guidebook are the things that were stolen. It gets better. Remember I said there were 5 Degas sketches taken? Guess which ones are described in the guidebook? The 5 that were taken are there. It gets better. Remember I said there was that Manet? That's it. That's the frame. Guess which is the only item from the Blue Room, from the guidebook, that was stolen? that. So I like this. This is really simple. I discovered this somewhere deep in the internet, but this is a simple explanation as to why those things were taken. Now, I did this thing down in Bourne, and a woman standing back there yelled at me, and she said, "You're wrong." So like, okay, fine, you know, I'm just a guy, I'm giving a speech. And so I went up and talked to her later, and I said, "So why do you think I'm wrong?" She said, "Well, my husband was a hitman for the mafia." She gave me her name. I looked her up and him up, and they were. And she said her husband told her that the stuff was taken, that was ordered, and was shipped overseas right away, just gone somewhere. Okay. I was in the hospital a couple of years ago, doesn't matter for what, and I'm fine. And my roommate and I started talking. He's like, "So what do you do, you know, in your retirement?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a book on the Gardner theft." And he starts laughing at me. I'm like, "John, why are you laughing at me?" He says, "Well, if I tell you, I'll have to kill you." Like, no. But I was in the hospital, so you know I was fine. So I kept bugging him for 3 days about why he was laughing, and finally the last day I went around the curtain, I sat on his bed, and I was like, "You know, you're going to tell me, or I'm going to start pulling things out of your arm." So he said, "Fine, I'll tell you." He said he was a Korean War vet, worked in the restaurant industry, went from a bouncer to owning a restaurant, and he owned a restaurant with Whitey Bulger, a nice restaurant, not like Triple O's The Hangout. And he said to me, "I'm telling you, Whitey did it." So this lady's telling me some mafia guys did it. This guy's telling me that this Whitey did it. And then the lady who was in my presentation the other day said her husband had pictures of it. So I don't know what's true or not. You have to think of this like the Kennedy assassination. There was never a trial. Evidence was never presented. Nobody was ever arrested for this. They've never presented evidence. So everything's just conjecture at this point, and everybody's dead, except for one guy. The actual guys who were in on this were dead within a year and a half. So it's sort of hard to say. So what wasn't taken? Well, there was that Rembrandt that was on the wall next to the little one. There was this, which is a Rubens. And there was this, which was one of 4 paintings commissioned by the King of Spain in the 1500s. And the 4 of those were once at the Gardner, and they're worth $1 billion together. They left that one. Now that one was big, and it was on the 3rd floor, so maybe they were just lazy and tired, but they didn't do it. So there were other attempts to get in the Gardner. I'll tell you a little bit more about those. A little more about the theft. I'll tell you who did it, and maybe where the stuff is. So a decade before the theft, the FBI had an undercover agent tracking stolen art. And he figured out, he got a tip that somebody was going to bust into the Gardner. So the FBI went to the Gardner and talked to the head of security. The first time I did this presentation, that head of security was in the audience. So he told me about this meeting, because I went to this, and he comes up, he's like, "Yeah, I was there." It's like, okay. Anyways, the FBI had a tip that a guy was going to do it. They changed everything around, nothing happened. A decade goes by. So that's the first one. 2 months before the theft, at the back door of the Museum of Fine Arts, 2 guys in Boston police uniforms go to the back door of the MFA, the part near the fence. "Hey, we hear there's been a disturbance. We want to talk to you." The guard says, "I can't let you in. That's against protocol. I got to find my boss." He goes running around the MFA, which is gigantic. It takes him 8 years to find his boss. By the time he gets back, the guys are gone. Got in their car and drove away. But 2 guys tried to get into the MFA a couple of months before the theft. 2 weeks before the theft, on that Palace Road, opposite the side entrance, 2 guys are beating another guy up. The guy who's getting beat up breaks away. He goes to that side entrance. "Hey, let me in, let me in. I'm getting beat up. I can't let you in. That's against our rules." He walks away from the side entrance, gets in the car with the 2 guys who are beating him up, and the 3 of them drive away together. Another attempt to get into the Gardner. Oh, the MFA, they never told anybody about the theft, about the attempt. They didn't tell the cops, they didn't tell the Gardner, they didn't tell anybody. Kept it to themselves. The night before the theft, 24 hours before the theft, at least 3, if not 4 people were let into the Gardner that night. And we know because there's a tape. And that's the tape. If you want to take a picture of that, you go to fbi.gov. You can watch this thing. It's hard to see. It's very dark. You have to like turn all the lights out, have your eyeballs the size of sewer covers. But if you watch it enough times, you see really interesting stuff. So I'll wait if you want to take a picture. Or you can just go to fbi.gov and put in Gardner, and you'll find it. It's pretty easy to see. But to spare you that, and I have that surveillance, so I took screenshots. So this is the old man. So remember I said the guards were old men and hippies? So this is the old man. You can see the time, right? 24 hours before the theft, a little before 1. Here's the guard, the old guard. Here's the counter. The buzzer is right back there behind that typewriter. Oh, this old guy was not on duty the night of the theft. He called in sick. He got replaced by somebody else. So there's the regular guard. There's the hippie. All right? He was on duty. His name's Rick Abath. He died 2 months ago. He's the one who let everybody in. He's the one who opened that side door. Remember I said at 1 o'clock? He did all of that. Here's a car. So this is, see, at 4719. At 4810, this is a car backing up on Palace Road away from the fence. So it's going the wrong way, and it stops opposite that side entrance. Here's 4839, and he's going to hit the buzzer. Oh, and the old guy leaves, and at 4858, here's somebody out of the car walking towards the side entrance. Here's 4915, he's hitting the buzzer to let this guy in. So that's at least one person will get let in. At 4918, somebody leaves, right? There's somebody there. Somebody goes in. But so at 4918, the car guy goes in, but at 4925, he leaves again. This is somebody walking away. So it's like he went in, said hello, and walked out. No idea why. At 4931, the car is turned on, so that guy is sitting in the car. The car door is never open again. So he does not get in and out. 4939, there's somebody going into the Gardner. And I'm telling you that car doors didn't open. So where did the second guy come from? He wasn't in the car. 4947, here's somebody who was let in. Yeah, this isn't working. So there's somebody who's been let in. He's right at the counter. This isn't going to work. Right? So nothing goes on until 5252, and there's somebody else at the counter. And at 5300, here's somebody else coming in, going past the guard station. And there's at 5310, somebody's there, and the car drives away. So by my count, that's 3 or 4 people who were let in, and nobody was supposed to be let in at all. August 15th, 2015, the ex-DA for Norfolk County, a guy named George Burke, is a lawyer. He has a client who came forward and said he knows who that guy who was walking in at the end is. And he gave that name to the district attorney. Nobody was ever prosecuted. But he says his client knows who that guy is, and that guy planned the whole thing. And his client doesn't want to come forward because he's afraid he's going to get killed. And nothing has happened since then, but somebody knows who that guy was, that he was the planner. Okay, so I told you about the partiers, right? The kids who were there. And I'll tell you about a car and the guards. So there's the statement from the kids, right? And they were just college kids. All they saw was the patch. The only thing that's interesting is the Nancy Clougherty there, she says the description, the sketch of the guys who went in did not match the face of the guys she saw driving. So that almost makes it seem like there were 3 people in the car, not just 2, because she says she saw somebody else. But they didn't know much, and they were sort of drinking, and so they just sort of went away. So that's what a 1988 red Dodge Daytona hatchback looks like. So it's not like it's a gray Toyota Corolla, of which there are a billion on the street. They had this car the night before the theft, and we know that because that's the car. So to me, that looks pretty much like the same kind of vehicle. So the same thing they had on the night before, they used the night of the theft. So that's Rick Abath. His cousin was in here and said he likes to be called Rick, not Richard. And he lived up in Upper Maine. He lived to be about 59. He was a teacher, never had great wealth, passed tons of lie detector tests, never did anything other than not be intelligent that night. So that's their house. So he was in that band called Uriah, and they would have $5 keg and weed parties. So you pay $5, you come in, you drink, you smoke, and you listen to rock and roll. The other guard that night was a guy named Randy Hested, who had nothing to do with anything. He was just called in that night. He was just there. So I had you imagine all this, but this is sort of a timeline until there. And for 15 minutes, the sensors in the Gardner didn't work. And they don't know why. They tested the equipment. Everything seemed to be working well. And they know that because they started working again. And then they stopped working again. And then they started working again. So something was going on with the electronics. So 2:45, they've done everything. They've got their stuff. They've gone in and out. And at 2:45, Gone Baby Gone, which is, by the way, if you haven't read it, is a really good book and a really good movie. Ben Affleck directed his brother Casey. Really fun stuff. So this is a picture of that side bump out the day of the theft. And that's what it looks like now. So it's on that Palace Road. And that was her private entrance. So this is just a cutaway of the Gardner and the timeline. So you can sort of see, they come in the side here, they park here, come in the side, take the guys downstairs, come up. When I had you imagine this, I never said that the fake cops went to the first floor. But that Manet, that was taken from the first floor. They don't know how that was stolen if the fake cops didn't go in. So they mostly messed around up there in the Dutch room, up there in the short gallery. Then they come back. These are the time gaps. And then 2:45, they're out the door. The only one who went in that blue room where the Manet was the guard Abath. And he went in twice. And he admits he was the one who opened that side door. He said he was testing the alarm, which makes no sense. Why would you test an alarm at 1 a.m. in the morning? Especially 15 minutes before you get robbed. So, remember I said that they took the tape that showed where all the movement was? The only thing the fake cops didn't know was there was a backup for that. And we know that because it was in another place. So this is what the tape looked like. So you can see, it says 3:18, 1:55, someone is in the Dutch room, investigate immediately. Yeah, no kidding, except there's nobody there to see it. There's nobody to warn anybody. The tape just keeps running and running and running, and it was discovered the next morning. So this is what he looked like down in the basement. Yes, let's see if this works this time. Oh, it does work now, I fixed it. So yes, that is a knife there, but that knife wasn't there originally. There were pictures of him without the knife, and then somebody took pictures later with the knife. So what do we know about the thieves? Well, we know from the night before, maybe those were the thieves who got let in and out. We know the revelers saw the car, and we know a timeline, and we have security guard descriptions, right? Because Abath and Hested saw the guys so they could give descriptions, and they could help with sketches. So those are the sketches that the police did. So this is the one guy, right? So mustache, no mustache. This is the other guy, mustache, no mustache. And they gave descriptions. Now the descriptions vary a little bit, and I'm sure you all know, police stories, eyewitness accounts are incredibly unreliable. So, one guy says glasses, no glasses. One guy says no mustache, mustache. One guy says no accent, accent. You know, it's all over the place. But they did help with the sketches. So who did it? Was it Abath and some other inside people? Is that who was going in the night before? Was it, you know, Pierce Brosnan from the Thomas Crown Affair? Was it the Pink Panther, right? Was it some famous art thief? Was it the Mafia, right? There's enough around. There's the Patriarchas, the Angulos, the Murrays, Whitey Bulger. Could have been any of those guys. Or was it just a couple of street guys who got lucky? So here's some possibilities. So here's Abath. Personally, I would have lost the haircut a long time ago, but you know, that's his choice. But he, like I said, he had no great sign of wealth. He has nothing. He passed lie detector tests, and he was never charged. Then there's this guy, a guy named Brian McDevitt, who was a known art thief and had tried to rob the Vanderbilt estate. But he was living on Beacon Hill, 2 miles away the day of the theft. But right after the theft, he moved to Hollywood. He told his girlfriend he had been paid to rob the Gardner and had to get out of town. Personally, I think he was just breaking up with her and trying to leave town. But he went to LA and wrote and pitched the Gardner theft as a movie, which nobody bought, and then he just disappeared. I have no idea where he went after that. Then there's this guy, Miles Connor. He comes from Milton. His dad was chief of police. He had a band called the Wild Ones, which were moderately famous, except he kept getting thrown in jail because he was stealing paintings all the time. So that sort of interrupted his music career. He stole a painting with that guy Bobby Donati. He stole a Rembrandt from the MFA and gave it back so he wouldn't go to jail. This is a picture of him. He cased the Gardner. He was friends with a guy named William Youngworth, who I'll get to. He was in jail the day of the theft also. He was in Lompoc, California. And I know a little bit more about this because he was at my presentation 3 presentations ago. He walks in, he's this scruffy guy. I sort of didn't recognize him. He wanted to trade books with me. I'm like, what do you mean you're going to trade a book? He's like, here. And it's got Miles Connor on the cover. He had a book published. And I'm like, well, I got to do my presentation. Can you wait? So he stayed there and he talked with my wife the whole time. Really interesting guy, told me all sorts of interesting stuff. He went there thinking a friend of his was doing the presentation, not me. But it was like, and the weird thing was, I'm doing this slide and he's sitting right where you are. It's like I'm talking about you while you're up there. It was surreal. But you know, I got through it and he said I didn't say anything wrong, so I was happy with that. Yeah, he was at Bellingham. So this is the guy, William Youngworth, who he knew. He stole a painting for Miles Connor. He was in jail a lot. He owned this place called Almost Antiques. Personally, I like the little Liberace there, right? Sort of classy. And he showed a reporter from the Herald a painting that he said was one of the Gardner ones. And he let the reporter scrape the oil off. And they tested it, and it was the right time period, but not the right painting. So he was trying to scam out for the $5 million reward at the time. He was friends with a guy named Joseph Murray, who we'll get to in a second. These guys are all interconnected. It's all so interconnected. Then there's this guy named David Houghton. He dated Miles Connor's sister. He went out to California to visit Miles Connor in jail and ask him, how should I break into the Gardner? And after the theft, he flew out again and went to Connor and told him that they had pulled it off. He confessed to Miles Connor. It's like, hey, we did it. We have the paintings. Maybe we can get you out of jail. And remember I said one of the eyewitnesses said the driver didn't look like one of the sketches? So Miles Connor said he was the driver. But he weighed 350 pounds, so he didn't go in because the guards weren't that scared. And he passed away in '92. Then there's this guy, Louis Royce. Remember I said a decade before the theft, the FBI thought they knew who was going to break in? It was this guy. And he was going to break in because he slept in the Gardner as a kid. When he was 13 or 14, he learned the man he thought was his father wasn't. He ran away from home. He became a street kid. And when he needed a place to sleep, he slept in the Gardner. He would go in, go under a table that had a tablecloth, sleep. In the morning, get up and go out. He knew the Gardner inside out. He cased the Gardner with some other mafia guys. He owned a place that fenced stolen art. He robbed a house and then gave the paintings back so he wouldn't go to jail. He passed away in 2020. It could have just been a couple of guys, right? So there's one sketch. There's the other sketch. So the guy on the left is George Reisfelder. The guy on the right is Lenny the Mutt DiMuzio. And those are the two guys with 99% certainty went in. They were the two fake cops. So here's George. He went by Jamaica Plain Reisfelder, which is sort of a boring nickname. But there he is smiling, being let off to jail for something else. And there's another picture of him. He owned a 1988 red Dodge Daytona hatchback. They used his car. Like, you should steal a car, right? And use that and then throw it in the Charles River or throw it in the Quincy Quarry or something. Pretty much. I hadn't noticed that, but sure. He worked, remember TRC Auto Electric? He worked at TRC Auto Electric. His sister-in-law said she saw that Shea Tortoni on his bedroom wall. He died of a coke overdose a year after the theft. His body was discovered by a guy named Carmelo Merlino, who we will meet in a second. So here's Lenny the Mutt. He worked at TRC Auto Electric. He disappeared a year after the theft, and it took them 3 months to find his body because it was in the trunk of his car under a bridge in East Boston. These guys are not dying peacefully in their nice old age. He was allegedly killed by a guy named David Turner, allegedly. So here's David Turner, and guess where he worked? TRC Auto Electric. You're sensing a pattern. So here's Carmelo Merlino. So Carmelo, handsome guy, I think. There's Carmelo. He was a Patriarcha underboss. And guess what auto repair store he owned? He owned TRC Auto Electric, out of which he ran a cocaine ring for the Patriarchas. So George Reisfelder, who died of a coke overdose, was discovered by his boss, who ran a coke ring. He robbed an armored car, did some jail time. He was caught on a wire talking about the theft. Not that he had the stuff, but he was talking about it. And he passed away in prison. So here's TRC Auto Electric. My wife and I went to a function at Florian Hall a couple of weeks ago, so we drove by it just for giggles. But that's what it looks like. So it's still there, it still operates. If you want to get your car fixed there, you can go ahead. I don't think they sell cocaine anymore, and you guys don't look like a cocaine crowd to me anyway, so I think you're going to stay away. So here's everybody who worked at TRC. George, Lenny, Bobby, David Houghton, Tony Romano. He wore the wire that caught Morlino talking about it, and Carmelo. So there's 7 people, all worked at TRC Auto Electric. So you have to think about this in layers, right? The 2 guys who went in were George and Lenny. The police uniforms were provided by that guy, Bobby Donati. So he's one layer up, maybe he hired them. But above him, there were other people who were like planning it and figuring out how they were going to sell the stuff. So who could be at that higher level? Well, it could be our friend. I don't think it's Whitey, and the reason is that he told Flemmy and Weeks, his 2 guys. So Whitey made his money by getting 15% of all the crime in his area. So if you robbed a bank, you gave him 15%. But he sent Flemmy and Weeks out to find who did it because he wanted 15% of the $250 million that the stuff was worth. And if he had done it, he wouldn't do that. Besides, he did things like, take over your liquor store or steal your $1 million lottery ticket, or he would just kill people. So doing something this detailed was not sort of his deal. So I don't think Whitey had anything to do with it. Do any of you remember the Valhalla? What's the Valhalla? Anybody? Gun running to the IRA. Whitey and Charles Murray from Charlestown put guns on that boat, shipped it out of Gloucester, goes across the Atlantic. They're giving guns to the IRA, but there's a double agent. He takes the guns, the boat comes all the way back. Everybody gets busted. So one theory is Whitey did the theft to give the paintings to the IRA so they could sell them to get more guns. But that's too complicated and I just don't like it, but it's a theory, so it's out there. So here's the guy, Bobby Donati. So he was a driver for, I told you all this stuff, he worked at TRC. He drove for this guy, Vinny the Animal Ferrara, who was in jail at the time. So another theory is he helped do this to get the paintings to get him out of jail. The night before the theft, in a bar in Revere, remember I said Revere, he had 2 full police uniforms in a brown paper bag that he was showing people. He was showing people the uniforms. So he did that. He's the one, remember, who showed the finial, the eagle, to the jeweler. This is his house in Everett that they tore apart thinking they would find stuff, but they didn't. But like everybody else in this who has not come to a nice end, okay? Now, not that his death is funny, but this part is. So look at this where it says, at this point we have no suspects. Unfortunately, in this kind of case, not too many witnesses come forward. Yeah, no kidding, you're going to get killed. Why would you come forward? So nobody did. But a friend of mine used to live in Revere, and he has relatives who are in the mafia. And we spent an afternoon together with this mafia guy, and he took me to like where he was killed and where the body was found and where all the other mafia guys were. It was a lot of fun. It was a good day. I did this presentation in Revere. My family was sure I was going to get killed, but my friend said his cousins would be there to protect me, so clearly, I made it out alive. So now we're going to level up. These are the guys who figured out how to distribute it. So one guy's a guy named Bobby Guarente. That's his picture. He hung out at TRC. He was a father figure to that David Turner guy. His widow said he gave some of the pieces to another guy named Bobby Gentile, who we'll get to. A mobster said that Guarente told him he had hidden the paintings in a concrete slab of a house in Orlando, Florida, but they jackhammered that and didn't find anything. He died in 2004, but he was friends with this guy, who's a Philadelphia mobster. And that's an interesting connection. So here's the guy, Bobby Gentile. So not only when I did the first presentation was the security director there, the director of the Gardner Mass Museum was in the audience. And he came to me and he said he got an anonymous tip. Somebody called up and said, my neighbor has all the Gardner stuff in the shed in his backyard. But the tipster had called Gardner Mass, not the Isabella Gardner. That's okay, the director knew what to do. He called the FBI. 2 seconds later, the FBI is out. They take the tape, and the next day, they are down there in Manchester, Connecticut, tearing his house apart. And beneath this, they found a false floor, and under the false floor, they found an article about the theft, and they found a list of the 13 items and what you could sell them for. They didn't find the stuff, and Ellen Guarente, Bobby Guarente's wife, said that her husband gave Gentile 2 of the paintings. Okay? Up there. So there's a link from Donati to Guarente to Gentile. He recently passed away. So then there's this poor guy. He was friends with Bobby Guarente. He bragged that he had 2 of the paintings. He didn't. That's a bad thing. So he and Guarente are up in Maine on vacation, and Guarente says, let's go down to Revere and go to the movies. So they drive their 2 cars down. They park in front of Jimmy Marx's place. There's his place. You see that little light bulb there? That light bulb is unscrewed, so it's dark, and while he's fiddling with his keys, you know what's going to happen. Guarente shoots him in the back twice with a shotgun. And we know this because Guarente's wife said he did it. So where's the stuff? Sort of getting to the end. So where could the stuff be? So it could be with that person who came to me a session ago and said she knows where the stuff is. So it could be somewhere in some suburb in Massachusetts. It could be in Revere, in Bobby Donati's place, right? Maybe there'll be a This Old House episode and they'll take a wall down and all of a sudden everything will come tumbling out. Why not? It could be in Maine. Maybe Guarente had some other hiding places. It could be in Connecticut. Maybe Gentile had places. It could be in Philadelphia with that guy Luisi, or it could be down in Orlando, but they tore his house apart, so it's not there. So here's what the FBI thinks. So read this part first. We've confidence identified the thieves, members of a criminal organization, Mid-Atlantic states, New England. That's TRC Auto Electric, okay? But then they say we think the stuff went to Connecticut and then Philadelphia and was offered for sale, but then now they have no idea where it is. So 2013 is sort of the end of the FBI trail. It's still an open case. I'm sure there's more known that this is all I could find in public, but that's sort of the link from, the theft to 2013 where they think the stuff is. So, just simple. Donati had the uniforms. He paid the two guys. He had the stuff for a while because he had the finial. Then he gave it to the other guys. Then it went to Philadelphia, Connecticut, and Maine, and then it went to Philadelphia. So I'm on Facebook. If you go on that website, you can see this PowerPoint if you care. And that's it, and I'm done. Thank you.